independent branches and form that you can use today, which is why more or less people end up just using MySQL even if they have preconceived notions that it had problems, couldn't do transactions. The default storage engine is InnoDB, and transactions have been around for many years now. So this is a bit of history. In 1979, there was Unireg, and this was a text UI to a ISAM store. And this is where Monty was actually basically first working on what became MySQL. The idea was rows would be written to disk, and you would have indexes on top of that. And around 86, the idea was that this was not that complete, so you would have forms to enter your data. And if you have used MySQL and browsed the data directory, you'd see that there are these .frm files, and those are form files. And basically the idea behind MSQL was that it was available but not open source. So Monty, the creator of MySQL and MariaDB, tried to plug the ISAM data store into MSQL. And in 96, shortly after MySQL AB was founded, you'd see version 3.19, and the whole Web 1.0 crowd was starting up, right? You would have famous websites like Slashdot and all those other companies that may not have survived today. But this was the idea that you could actually spin up multiple instances and have them replicated, but replication itself didn't come then. It was the idea that you would scale out and have cheap read-only data stores. In 2000, we then had the GPL MySQL server, the first GPL v2 MySQL server, and MySQL till today, including all the branches, are GPL v2 licensed. It was shortly thereafter that the idea was to also implement a dual license, so that not only did you have the libmysql being previously LGPL, we would now make it GPL to ensure that we would be able to get money from people that wanted to embed the database. And this actually proved to be quite a lucrative way of making money, because people would pay you a license fee to put this into things like Cisco routers that they didn't want to open source, or into things like Adobe software, Bridge, and so forth. And licensing at one point in time was more than half the revenue MySQL got. Today, you don't find this to be so common, because presumably if you need an embedded data store, you would pick up SQLite, which is public domain software. So, and SQLite is everywhere. Today you get it on an Android phone, an iOS phone. I can ensure that every one of you has a SQLite device on your person. The first rounds of replication came in 3.23 May, and this was statement-based replication, which basically meant that whatever statement was executed on the master would be also replicated statement-wise on the slave. And this obviously could cause lots of inconsistencies, but it was the best form of replication out there, and it was out of the box. You contrast this to when built-in replication came to Postgres, which is the other famous open source database. And Postgres out of the box replication only came in September 2010. It took a very long time before you got easy replication in Postgres. Probably one of the most famous releases of then MySQL became 3.23. And shortly thereafter, we also managed to start seeing the InnoDB storage engine, which meant that you finally had transactions, MVCC. MySQL was no longer a toy database, it was a real database. And MySQL was also a company that took venture capital money, and in 2001, this is exactly what happened. Newsphere. Today, you probably have read a lot of articles about court cases that Google and Oracle are fighting around Android and APIs being copyrightable. You don't hear so much about GPL cases being taken to court. There's only one that's fairly talked about lately, and that is VMware being taken to court in Germany for GPL violations. But the first ever test for the GPL in the court of law was actually with MySQL and Newsphere over the Gemini storage engine. And the courts actually proved that GPL can be enforced, and the Gemini engine was eventually open sourced but abandoned. In 2003, we invested heavily in engineering after getting our Series B money. And then we, as you can see, made a lot of releases. We made a 4.0 GA and a 4.1 and 5.0 alpha almost immediately. There was also a partnership with SAP to make MaxDB available. MaxDB was this Pascal-based engine that you could use. It's not available anymore. And then NDB cluster, Alzato was, it was taken from Ericsson. And this is what powers most cell phone home location recorders. It provides 5 nines uptime, and it's highly available, but requires a setup of maybe a minimum of 5 machines. And it was also largely the first NoSQL database out there because it had an NDB API. After acquisition, it had to be plugged into MySQL. And that's shortly after the 4.1 GA. Now, Oracle eventually acquired Innobase. So if you realize, a crucial part of MySQL has always been owned by Oracle for more than 10 years. We made a GA in October 2005 of 5.0, and this became a fairly contentious release because there was a broken application binary interface, but it also came with lots of enterprise features. It made MySQL enterprise ready. It allowed you to have views, stored procedures, triggers, and a lot of other things that would make it a real mature database. And it took about a year before it stabilized. Of course, we would take more money later on, and the answer to InnoDB being owned by Oracle was we acquired Netfrastructure to make the Falcon storage engine, and some people in this room may remember this as well. And it turns out that Falcon is nowhere today. But we were the only database that made a pluggable storage engine architecture. And this was unprecedented back in the day, 10 years ago. In fact, the only other popular database today that made a storage engine pluggable infrastructure was MongoDB about a year or 2 years ago. And that didn't exist in any other database. And today you can see that not only does MySQL or MariaDB have many engines, MongoDB also has a bunch of engines. PBXT was also an idea to make a log-based storage engine, and it aimed to have lots of performance, but it never really took off. InnoDB is really hard to unseat. It's a very good storage engine. In fact, I would presume most people use InnoDB. And for us, unlike MongoDB, where things like keys and GIS are provided inside of MongoDB, and the engine doesn't have to provide that, so the API is cleaner, it's easier for you to write an engine. Here in MySQL, it's not very clear, unfortunately. We focused on making engines different, the way it's stored, the types of indexes you could use, the memory usage, if it had transactions or not, locking levels. Some could be table locking, row locking, types of data it would support. Would that be full text search? Today, if you write a MongoDB engine, full text search is provided by the kernel as opposed to being provided by the engine. And this is something that we say you can provide or not provide it. GIS, backup, storing keys. This looks better. And then we as a company, we were growing. MySQL was very widely used, and then we said, look, I think it's time. We all decided we'll have an IPO and put ourselves on the stock market. But that didn't happen because Sun Microsystems acquired us for $1 billion. And at that time, $1 billion was a lot of money. Today, it seems to be nothing. And that's shortly when after that, Drizzle actually started. And the whole idea behind it being modular, having a microkernel architecture, using UTF-8 by default. I mean, if you write web apps today, you're thinking in UTF-8 already. All of this is now kind of standard in shipping MySQL. And then in 2008, November, 5.1 became GA, but just like the 5.0 release, it was not really GA quality. But that's also when we started seeing the first ever Percona patch set. It wasn't a server, but it was more a patch set back then. It was Percona SQL, Percona server, and so forth. And a lot of the work that went into that patch set came out of work that was done by Google and Facebook. The teams that ran the MySQL back then. Monty left Sun in 2009, as did I, because we wanted to go start multi-program maybe to make MariaDB. And 6.0 was canned, and there was a new development model for MySQL. It was going to follow the whole development milestone release, train release model with labs releases. And largely, the reason many of us had to leave in engineering was because Oracle acquired Sun, and we wanted variety to work on other things to ensure we could make MariaDB better. It's been quite a while since we made our first MariaDB GA release. A lot has happened since then. I mean, we've seen MySQL 5.5 come and become deprecated because we have 5.6 and 5.7. We have seen many improvements like GIS, replication, and so forth, and optimized that made its way into MySQL 5.6. So changes that you see in MariaDB today may come in MySQL tomorrow. Changes you see in MySQL today may come in MariaDB tomorrow, and so forth. And the merge for 5.5 took a fairly long time because we made so many changes to the optimizer. So MariaDB in the end became a corporate-backed MySQL variant because SkySQL AB picked up multi-program. So there was a lot to celebrate, so to speak, from 2014 in the sense that WebScale came about, but 2015 also brought the releases of both MariaDB 10.1 and MySQL 5.7. But 2016 has brought us some interesting things from the MySQL world. For one, we have realized that post general availability, so after a release has been made, you don't usually add new features into point releases. But we have now seen this happen where InnoDB finally got data at rest encryption inside of post-GA release in MySQL. This is something MariaDB had in October 2015 as well. And then you also see that in 5.7.12, you have the use of protocol buffers, the X protocol, MySQL shell, the XDev API. So changes are happening to MySQL post-GA now as well. And many other changes probably happen. If you use Linux, you realize most of your distributions have switched to MariaDB. Of course, there are other, Percona is also very interested to be shipped there as well. We see a lot of investment from Facebook in RocksDB and MyRocks. But that's not all in the ecosystem. We also have Galera cluster and CodaShip. This is the idea that not only inside a server today you have asynchronous replication, which means that a master gets a transaction and a slave may never get it. You have a semi-synchronous replication plugin, which means a slave will, at least one slave will acknowledge receiving what the master has received. And then you have Galera, which is fully synchronous replication, where all nodes are equal. And it uses things like optimistic concurrency control. And you see that there are two distributions of this as well. There's Percona XDB cluster as well as MariaDB Galera cluster. And we see a lot of people actually end up using this because OpenStack recommends it. So if you deploy OpenStack, this is something that could be quite interesting for you. We have seen case studies from HP DNS as a service, Breeze, Mercado Libre, PagerDuty, AVG. This is getting to be very popular, which is again why MariaDB has integrated this into MariaDB 10.1. But MySQL and the ecosystem is also about being open source. It's not just meant to be an open source product. It's meant to be an open source project. And many do take external contributions. MariaDB by far excels very well in this by getting contributions more or less. MySQL will require you to also sign an Oracle contributor agreement, and they will actually award you for signing this. WebScale has it much easier as well, and they don't want to do contributor agreements, but more or less everyone will accept the bug reports, but may not give you direct commit access to a tree. MariaDB has a 50-50 split, more or less, with corporation and foundation employees versus community members being able to contribute to the GitHub tree. MariaDB participates in Google Summer of Code, and we've been getting more and more students every year with more and more features every year that are coming from student-mentor relationships. This is in huge contrast to when I ran this program back in MySQL, where we did have many projects, but they never could make it into a shipping release because the release trees were close to like 3 years apart, 2 to 3 years apart, and it was very difficult to get a student to work on the next tree as opposed to today's tree. Security is also a fairly important thing, and Oracle makes critical patch updates probably once a quarter, and you should always upgrade when they make a CPU because they actually have these undisclosed amounts of CVEs. They're fairly obscure, and they basically mean you should upgrade because you don't want to have people breaking into your MySQL. When it comes to MariaDB, we get CVE reports as well, and we aim to always fix and release in less than 48 hours, and typically this can happen sometimes even in less time. And we synchronize with Linux distributions as well to ensure that there is a special packages mailing list so that they know that there is going to be an update for security coming soon. Percona roughly follows Oracle, but also takes security fixes from MariaDB. So from a Percona and MariaDB standpoint, the idea is to always ensure you have the latest security fixes. Many people like to say that MySQL is dying, MySQL is dead, you should use a modern NoSQL database, Oracle will kill MySQL. But honestly speaking, Oracle isn't really bad. We're getting a better MySQL every time. We're also getting external contributions. People are using it. There's amazing amounts of shared knowledge that did not exist or does not exist for many other systems. And I would say it's at its most vibrant today than it has ever been. Oracle is not only pushing MySQL development forward, we have MariaDB pushing MySQL development forward because you see features like multi-source replication in MariaDB 10. You wait a couple of years, Oracle will have it as well in MySQL 5.7. These are important things that will make the MySQL better for everybody who's using it. And if you look very carefully, very carefully, it's good that the colors that are actually showing more or less are telling you what's running versions of MySQL. So there is one site here. This is the Alexa Top 20 rankings. And if you go to Alexa, you can see the global top 20 sites. Out of 20 sites, 19 run some variant of MySQL. And people like Facebook, they run a 5.6 patch set, and they publish everything to GitHub as well. So you can get them there as well. People like Taobao and Alibaba, they contribute not only to WebScale, they also gave MariaDB multi-source and other features. Amazon, they've got Aurora, but they're also shipping MySQL and MariaDB in RDS. And unfortunately, the parts you can't see is number 1 would be Google, number 2 is Facebook, and number 3 is YouTube, and I think number 6 is Wikipedia. Google, YouTube, Wikipedia, they're all powered by MariaDB. And this is quite a good thing. So when people tell you MySQL is dying, ask them, what are the web scale sites today running? What's powering your everyday usage on your mobile or mobile web? It's more or less some variant of MySQL, so it's far from dying. So defaults tend to matter, and if you look at Debian, which is a Linux variant, you will realize they have something called Popcorn, which is an opt-in statistics system, and we can sort of see that MySQL Server 5.5 leads the way, and MariaDB is sort of like 10% of that number, and that's largely because defaults really, really matter. And we can get more statistics like from the Docker Hub and Juju Charms and so forth, but more or less, if you're the default of some sort, it makes a huge difference. in more instances than one, I guess. The other parallel to how we see database usage is OpenStack users. What are OpenStack users using? And this was from the October 2015 survey, where they surveyed over 1,300 users or something. And you'd actually notice that, yes, MySQL is fairly popular for production use case. Second most popular is MariaDB Galera cluster, followed by MariaDB. And they also split this into dev, QA, and proof of concept. And you can get these surveys, which are done once every 6 months from OpenStack.org. And in the Galera cluster space, you'd actually see Protona XDB cluster having 9% of the deploys versus MariaDB Galera cluster having 70% of the deploys. Now, because this changes once every 6 months, I'd like to bring your attention to what was done in April. And here, you'll actually see that MariaDB server is now up 6 points from previously, and Galera cluster dropped 1 point. And this could largely be because Galera cluster has integrated into MariaDB as well. And when I earlier mentioned defaults matter, OpenStack users by and large use Ubuntu. That's the most popular version of OS for deployment. And the default in Ubuntu is actually MySQL 5.5. And the latest release is MySQL 5.7. And of course, that wouldn't have made it into this survey. So people are making a conscious decision to choose MariaDB as opposed to using MySQL. When it comes to the external ecosystem, if you go to GitHub, you'll realize that people like Yahoo are developing monitoring tools. Yelp is open sourcing their tools. Box, Dropbox, Booking has MaxScale in production. Pinterest, many companies are open sourcing their tools because this is not core to their running business. So it's best to open source it, and also in the hopes of getting more engineering talent to join them. MySQL 5.7 comes with a whole bunch of useful features, multi-source replication, replication filters that are dynamics, things that MariaDB has had for a very long time, lossless semi-sync, explain for running connection, GIS. You can now actually use GeoJSON and do GIS functionality inside of MySQL. And MariaDB has had GIS functionality since 5.3 as well. Turning on global transaction IDs in an online fashion. The JSON and the MySQL shell, in my opinion, are extremely exciting. Yes, it's new. It only got launched in like March or April of this year. Actually, it's April of this year. But I find it to be extremely exciting because if you are familiar with MongoDB and the idea of JavaScript and querying in JavaScript instead of SQL, you could use MySQL shell and also query stuff in a JavaScript-like format. It's kind of brilliant. So there are a whole bunch of useful features that have come out in MySQL 5.7, but that MariaDB has had before as well. And MariaDB still shines in the sense that there are enterprise features that are still open, like the thread pool. There are more things like roles. Default roles can be set for a user. So you can group users, so think of it like Etsy group. Extended regular expressions, parallel replication that's extremely fast. So there are still many things that MariaDB has that is sort of a superset of MySQL. And then there's Protona Server, which also has many features, like the utility user, backup locks, ToQ backup because they acquired TokuDB. ToQ backup is very good, and TokuDB is a great engine for compression, and of course MariaDB ships it as well. And then 5.7 came out recently where they removed InnoDB fake changes so that you should use intra-database parallel replication. So a lot of changes, lots of choices. WebScale. Oracle doesn't accept changes from WebScale because the CLA hasn't been signed. But there are some interesting features like super read-only that have made its way into MySQL and MariaDB. And when you see a feature in WebScale that you like, that you don't seem to get, you should ask your vendor to provide such a feature for you. I like the Facebook tree a lot because that's where I see a lot of interesting improvements. The whole idea of JSON document data types, they had it with something called DocStore for a very long time. Mylux is a great storage engine that has RocksDB as a backend. It uses a long structured merge tree, and it's got good insert speeds, good compression, and it's better than InnoDB from a compression standpoint. And its only weakness is when it's basically running when the whole workload fits into memory. So there are actually a whole bunch of useful features here as well. But nobody compiles this and nobody says they're supporting it, so you either have to know how to code or ask your vendor to port it out. Alibaba has AliSQL, and they have things like built-in SQL firewalls. They can log shutdown information. They can even compress instead of on a column level basis. And Alibaba runs a huge e-commerce site, and up here I put Singles Day, and Singles Day is like the biggest shopping day in the history of China, and Singles Day generally beats Thanksgiving. And there's also a whole bunch of non-server ecosystem stuff, where you get things like MHA, Tungsten Replicator from Continuance, now VMware, Orchestrator, which lets you look at replication topologies and used at places like Booking and Etsy and so forth. There are a lot of tools that you don't see in many other ecosystems because this is such a mature ecosystem that people have built stuff to make their life easier. When it comes to GNU Linux distributions, you see MariaDB more or less everywhere. And the good news is that the next version of Debian will have MariaDB as a default provider as opposed to MySQL as well. But things also die. In 21 years of existence, things like Drizzle has passed. Many storage engines like Infobright, Kelpon, Tokitech, they couldn't make a business out of just a storage engine, so they've actually ended up dead as well. There were also maybe things like Kickfire and Schooner where they made appliances, SQL appliances, and they've all been acquired. So the future is where you will see MySQL 5.8, or most likely it's going to be renamed MySQL 8.0. They've already been planned. And the answer to Java cluster will be something called group replication. Fotona does not aim to ever be a fork. They will work closely with Oracle, maybe port stuff from MariaDB, and add features that customers find useful. MariaDB 10.2, already in alpha, has window functions for analytics, common table expression, transfer connect and disconnect, full 5.7 compatibility. And WebScale will skip 5.7, but they will backport features to their 5.6 tree. You may also use MariaDB or MySQL in the cloud, and pretty much everyone here offers some form of hosted service. And Amazon is by and large probably the most popular, but there's also Rackspace, and there's Google Compute Engine, and Pivotal Cloud Foundry. Plenty of discussions happen because, like I said, these are all open source projects, and you definitely want to take a look at all of these mailing lists if you want to keep track of what's going on in the ecosystem. You also want to take a look at all these bug trackers because, hey, it's a lot of fun to see what bugs affect other people. And the best part about using MySQL is hopefully someone else found a bug that when you encounter it, it's already either fixed or you know the workaround. What you should use today, more or less, we're concluding. You should think about the innovation that is happening today and what you need to use today. You want to have freedom from vendor lock-in. You want to have freedom from vendor independence. Look at, how the websites have changed. Look at, CEO and management changes. You want to look at support vendors. You want to look at if they're funded, if they're funded to stay in business. We've seen people go out of business. You want to make sure that they have, numbers matter sometimes. You want to always ensure you're well supported. And think about the features you need today, also the features you'll need 18 to 24 months from now. So maybe you don't need a feature that one database is providing, but you want to look at the roadmap. And some vendors don't provide roadmaps, so it's worth looking at. So I think mastering the MySQL ecosystem takes a lot of time. And a famous database person, Michael Stonebreaker, said that for Facebook, using MySQL is a fate worse than death. So they made a funny t-shirt. And MySQL has been around for a very long time. So there are lots of wide and varied solutions that you can actually use, and you should use. But I think the best thing to do is always go in with informed decisions and ask your peers. So, with that, I'd like to say thank you. And I think I have a minute for questions if you have any. And you can also email questions to me. So, do you have any questions? Yes, I'm back.